Think about this. Frozen milk on the doorstep. The coal fire wouldn't start, and the streets were so quiet that you could hear your own breath turning to frost. It wasn't simply the winter. This was the winter that Britain froze. The Big Freeze of 1963. For 3 long months, life in Britain was a fight between warmth and a world that had become cold. But somehow we made it through with wool socks, determination, and a little bit of British humor. It started right after Christmas in 1962. People believed it was simply another cold spell, with a few days of snow and then things would go back to normal. But the snow kept coming down. Temperatures have plummeted below -15 on New Year's Day. The roads were gone. The temps froze over for the first time in a long time. White encircled whole communities, making them look like islands. The BBC said it was the hardest freeze since 1795. And it wasn't an exaggeration. Deliveries of coal stopped because trucks couldn't move. The pipes for the water broke. Before breakfast, the milk froze. When the kids woke up, they saw icicles hanging from the windows in their rooms. Not outside, but inside. You'd scrape them off just to get some light. Moms put newspapers under the doors to keep the cold air out. Fathers went outside with shovels and came back empty-handed. The snow made a sound like breaking glass as you walked on it. But life went on slowly, resolutely, and in a very British way. Britain is on hold. The country came to a stop. Trains became stuck on the tracks. The powerful steam engines even gave up. Their water tanks froze into blocks of ice. People stayed in carriages for hours, even overnight, covered in newspapers, cold and waiting for help. The roads were impossible. Snow covered cars up and made them disappear. The first time in history that motorways closed. People walked for miles through the snow to get in line for bread, only to find that the bakery was frozen shut. But life went on in that very British way through it all. People who lived next door knocked on each other's doors. People who didn't know each other helped push autos. And every morning, someone still brewed a pot of tea, even if they had to melt snow to get it done. The postman even tried his luck by walking through knee-deep snow with cold hands and yet wearing shorts. Because that's how things have always been. Families played cards by candlelight when the electricity went off at night, imagining it was enjoyable. And maybe, just maybe, it was. Living inside with the scent of coal. Having central heating was a luxury. One coal fire was used to heat most dwellings. Families crowded into the living room, reaching out to the flames. Even inside, your breath still steamed in front of you. People torched anything that would catch when the coal ran out. Old newspapers, furniture legs, and even orange crates. The scent of soot was everywhere, thick, heavy, and strangely comfortable. The blackout came back at night, but not because of conflict. It was because of power problems. The candles flickered. The only sounds were the wind, the tick of the mantel clock, and the drip of melting frost every now and then. Over the fire, kids used long forks to toast bread. One side was scorched and the other was still raw. Moms put frozen milk bottles in pans of hot water to thaw them. Fathers said they were checking the fire, which usually meant staring at it in quiet for 20 minutes. And everyone wore layers, thick jumpers, scarves, and if you were lucky, 2 pairs of socks that practically matched. The kids were out of school and out of the house. When schools finally closed, I wasn't sad. It was freedom. Kids made the frozen world into a place to play. The fights with snowballs went on all day. Biscuit tins, wooden tea trays, and sometimes Mom's best baking sheet were used to make sledges. You'd come home with a big smile on your face, soaking and cold. Parents didn't care about safety gear. They were anxious about the clothes. The heat steamed the wool socks. The gloves were frozen solid. But if you ask anyone who went through it, they'll say, best winter of my life. There was a snowman on every corner, and they all looked a little creepy. On the second day, you'd make an igloo, crawl inside, and say you were warm. You'd beg that Thor would wait just one more day when the first hint of sunshine came. The country that laughed through the cold. Even when pipes broke and there was no more coal, there was still laughter. In Piccadilly Circus, newspapers printed cartoons of penguins. Radio DJs made fun of snowmen who wanted ration cards. And as usual, the BBC went on, calm, polite, and entirely unaffected. They reported that most places had gotten a lot of snow. Drivers are told not to. That was it. No drama, no terror, simply calmness and a lack of emotion. The well-known British stiff upper lip is still very much there, even if it is frozen. People who were daring enough to walk to pubs met there. Before it exited the tap, the beer was cold. The laughter, on the other hand, made the room warm. You stayed where you were if you found a seat near the fire. This was partially because it was comfortable and largely because you couldn't feel your legs anymore. The cost to people. The truth was hard to take behind the laughs. It was hard for older folks to stay warm. There were too many cases of hypothermia and pneumonia for hospitals to handle. The NHS had never seen anything like it before. Doctors struggled through snow that was waist-deep to conduct house calls. Their bags were half frozen and their breath was fogging up the air. Hundreds of thousands of people lost their jobs and heating when factories and stores shuttered. Not only was Britain chilly, it was also destitute. The country was slowly getting better after the war, but this winter put all of that progress to the test. But even when things were rough, there remained something unshakable in the air. A quiet pride that whispered, "We'll be fine." And they did manage. People in communities let their neighbors who had lost power come in. People used church halls as temporary homes. And families who didn't talk much before the freeze exchanged food, warmth, and discussion. You know what's important when the fire goes out. People, the freezing water, and the quiet countryside. The North Sea froze solid along the coast. Ice-stranded fishing boats. Harbors are like glass mirrors. Children skated on the rivers that froze so thick. Whole families wandering on surfaces that hadn't frozen in hundreds of years. But there was a cost to beauty. Farmers couldn't do anything as lambs and cows froze in the fields. By the time the thaw got there, tens of thousands of animals were dead. It was awful, yet no one said anything. They just did it. That's what Britain was best at. Endure in silence with a sigh and a shrug. There were still times when I was amazed. There was so much snow that it covered hedgerows and phone boxes. Icicles dangled from roofs like glass swords. And at night, when the sky was clear, the world gleamed like it was covered in diamonds. The quiet was so intense that you could hear your own heart pounding. Britain looked like a fairy tale for a few weeks. Cold, terrible, and lovely. Just getting away from the cold. While Britain was freezing, something amazing was happening on the other side of the Atlantic. In February 1963, the Beatles recorded Please, Please Me. They were taking over America by the time the snow melted. It felt like one generation was stuck in the past and another was moving on to something completely different. But for most, the revolution could wait. Right now, the best thing was being warm. Imagine that people filled up movie theaters not to see the movies, but to stay warm. Soup and shelter were available in church halls. People who had only talked to each other a few times previously shared coal and blankets. It wasn't comfort, but it was a sense of community. And in that connection, something magical happened that no one saw. People who had been quiet for years started talking again. You'd stop over to see whether they were okay and wind up staying for hours. There was laughter, gossip, and hope that was slowly melting away like the frost on the windows. The thaw began when it eventually came in March, some 3 months later. The roads came back. Water dripped from the roofs like applause. The first delivery trucks drove through the mud and were greeted like heroes. Britain, exhausted, frostbitten, and covered in soot, began to breathe again. People celebrated when the milk came in for the first time without being frozen. The mail came. The pipes broke one last time, and the air smelled like mud instead of smoke. That spring, flowers seemed brighter, tea tasted better, and life felt more real. It was as if the birds were singing louder to celebrate being alive. The clotheslines were full again, the stores were open again, and by Easter, everything felt like a dream. A lengthy, white, unreal dream that no one would ever forget. The winter that changed a generation. People who lived through the winter of 1963 will all say the same thing. Yes, it was cold, but it brought us together. There were no smartphones, no central heating, and no delivery apps, but people were strong. Neighbors looked out for each other. Families sat close to the fire and talked to each other. That winter was full of bad things, but it became a memory of pride. A story told with a smile and a shiver. It wasn't simply about getting through the cold. It was about finding warmth, the kind that comes from people and not from a heater. The Great Freeze of '63 was not fun, but it was something I will never forget. It put Britain's patience, sense of humor, and strength to the test. And somehow we made it through. even if the cold didn't get to us. It made us remember who we were, a country that complains about the weather but never lets it win.